On June 20, 1944, German signals intelligence units monitoring Soviet radio networks along the Belarusian front detected normal communication patterns. Radio intercepts showed Soviet units maintaining defensive positions. Traffic analysis indicated a standard operational routine. Communications matched patterns observed throughout spring 1944. The radio signature suggested Soviet forces remained in their established positions, conducting routine defensive operations. German intelligence, incorporating this signals data, concluded that the Belarusian sector showed no indication of imminent offensive operations. 3 days later, on June 23, 1944, Soviet forces launched Operation Bagration. Over 2 million soldiers attacked from positions whose strength and composition German signals intelligence had fundamentally misjudged. The artillery preparation came from locations where radio intercepts had suggested only routine defensive deployments. Within hours, it became clear that much of the traffic German intelligence had monitored came from deception networks, real transmitters simulating units that had already redeployed. Soviet forces had conducted one of the largest military redeployments of the war, while German radio intelligence listened to false transmissions designed to conceal the movement. This was not an isolated technical failure. Throughout 1943 to 1945, Soviet operations began with German signals intelligence failing to detect preparations because radio deception units systematically created false networks that appeared normal, while operational forces in attack sectors observed strict radio silence. The technique appeared repeatedly. Stalingrad, Kursk defensive preparations, the Vistula-Oder offensive. Each operation succeeded partly because German signals intelligence was systematically defeated by radio Maskirovka, designed to exploit how signals analysis worked. German signals intelligence on the Eastern Front was extensive and sophisticated. Fremde Heere Ost maintained dedicated signals units operating intercept stations that monitored Soviet communications. Direction-finding equipment located Soviet transmitters, and traffic analysis tracked communication patterns, identifying unit locations and operational activity levels. The system had successfully tracked Soviet force movements and provided warning of offensive preparations in previous operations. Radio communications were fundamental to military operations. Armies needed to coordinate across dispersed units, and orders had to reach subordinate commands. Artillery required precise fire direction. Those communications created radio signatures that signals intelligence could detect and analyze. Even encrypted messages revealed information through traffic patterns. The volume of transmissions, their timing, and the networks of stations communicating all provided intelligence about force dispositions. Soviet forces planning major offensives confronted a challenge that seemed impossible. Moving armies required coordination, and that coordination should generate detectable radio traffic. If units maintained communications during movement, German signals intelligence would track their relocations. If units stopped all communications, the sudden silence would itself indicate that something significant was happening. Either keeping radios active or going silent produced patterns and signatures that could reveal Soviet intentions. The solution was systematic radio deception combined with operational silence in attack sectors. The concept was not simply maintaining silence during movements. It involved creating false radio networks that continued transmitting in sectors forces were leaving, while operational forces in attack areas maintained strict radio silence. German signals intelligence continued detecting what appeared to be normal communications from Soviet units in known positions, even though those units were actually moving under a communications blackout toward attack positions elsewhere. Implementation required sophisticated coordination. Radio deception units, separate from operational forces, were equipped with transmitters and trained operators. These units received detailed information about the radio networks they were to simulate. Call signs, communication patterns, encryption procedures, and transmission schedules all had to match the networks used by the forces they were replacing. Deception units established themselves in sectors the operational forces were vacating, and they began transmitting communications that mimicked normal traffic. The false networks had to maintain realistic patterns. Military radio communications follow predictable rhythms. Command nets transmitted at certain frequencies, and administrative traffic occurred at regular intervals. Radio deception units replicated these patterns using scripted transmissions that sounded like routine military communications. The content focused on supply matters, personnel issues, and routine reports, the daily communications that characterized defensive operations. Meanwhile, operational forces in attack sectors preparing for offensives operated under strict radio silence. Units moving into attack positions ceased all radio transmissions in those sectors, while other parts of the front maintained normal traffic patterns. Communications between headquarters and subordinate commands in attack areas functioned through courier and landline telephone systems, which left no radio signature. Orders were delivered by messengers. Coordination occurred through direct liaison rather than radio networks. The challenge was maintaining command and control without radio in attack sectors. Soviet forces developed systematic procedures for courier communications. Messages were transported by motorcycle couriers or by runners between command posts. Landline telephone systems carried communications where cables could be established. The methods were slower than radio, but they enabled coordination while maintaining emissions security in critical sectors. German signals intelligence continued monitoring Soviet communications throughout preparation periods. Intercept stations detected transmissions from known Soviet sectors, and direction-finding equipment located transmitters in the positions analysts expected. Traffic analysis showed communication patterns consistent with defensive operations. Intelligence officers concluded Soviet forces remained in their positions, conducting routine defensive activities. Intercepts gave a clear but misleading picture. What German signals intelligence was actually monitoring were radio deception units transmitting false traffic. The stations located were deception transmitters placed in sectors that operational forces had already left. The communications intercepted were scripted transmissions designed to suggest normal defensive operations. The traffic patterns were deliberately maintained at levels matching previous defensive periods. Deception units turned real intelligence into false confirmation. Direction-finding equipment, when it triangulated Soviet radio transmitters, located positions where deception units were operating, not where operational forces had moved. The intelligence picture built from direction-finding data therefore showed Soviet units in their known defensive positions, because that is where the deception transmitters had been positioned. Direction-finding data led analysts to the wrong locations. Traffic analysis, the systematic study of communication patterns to determine enemy activities, was deliberately targeted by Soviet procedures. German analysts tracked volume of communications, timing of transmissions, and networks of stations to assess Soviet operational tempo. Radio deception units maintained traffic volumes matching defensive periods, and transmission timing followed patterns consistent with routine operations. The analysis suggested normal defensive activity because deception units precisely replicated the signatures associated with defensive operations. Traffic analysis was fooled by deliberate imitation. The level of sophistication required close coordination between operational commanders and deception units. Operational forces provided deception units with detailed information about normal communication patterns. Deception operators had to understand the networks they were simulating well enough to maintain realistic traffic while being monitored. Timing had to be synchronized, so deception networks activated as operational forces in attack sectors ceased transmissions. Coordination and timing made the deception effective at operational scale. The systematic application across multiple operations demonstrated this was doctrine rather than improvisation. Operation Bagration in June 1944 used radio deception to conceal force concentration in Belarus. The buildup before the Stalingrad encirclement in November 1942 employed false networks to mask force movements. Vistula Oder offensive preparations in January 1945 included radio Maskirovka that prevented German detection of the scale of concentrations in bridgeheads. Each operation applied the same fundamental procedures: operational silence in attack sectors and false networks maintaining apparent normalcy in rear areas. German signals intelligence officers, when they became aware deception had occurred, attempted to identify indicators they had missed. Retrospective analysis sometimes revealed subtle anomalies, but these indicators were ambiguous during real-time analysis. Operators had to make assessments based on available information, without knowing whether they were monitoring real or false networks. The technique succeeded because it exploited how signals intelligence analysis worked. German procedures assumed radio communications represented real military activity. Detecting communications from known Soviet positions suggested forces remained in those positions. Soviet Maskirovka procedures were designed around an understanding of German collection and analysis methods. The coordination required to execute radio deception at operational scale was substantial. Multiple armies required multiple deception networks operating simultaneously. Each deception unit had to maintain its assigned network through the preparation period. Operational forces in attack sectors had to maintain absolute communications discipline. Any transmission from actual attack forces would compromise the deception by providing German direction-finding equipment with a transmitter location in an unexpected position. The impact on German intelligence assessment was decisive. Signals intelligence was a major component of German understanding of Soviet capabilities. When radio intercepts suggested Soviet forces remained in defensive positions, intelligence officers incorporated that information into overall assessments. German forces positioned based on assessments that seemed well supported by signals intelligence were surprised when actual operations began. The deception demonstrated that technical collection capabilities could be systematically defeated by an adversary who understood collection methods. German signals intelligence equipment was sophisticated and procedures were professional. But when Soviet forces designed deception specifically to create signatures that would be analyzed as indicating defensive operations, the technical capabilities collected information that was deliberately false. Soviet radio deception doctrine validated the principle that operational security combined with active deception was more effective than security alone. Simply maintaining radio silence would have alerted German intelligence that something significant was occurring. Creating false networks that appeared normal while operational forces in attack sectors moved silently achieved security while providing deception that reinforced German assessment errors. On June 20, 1944, German signals intelligence monitoring the Belarusian front detected Soviet radio networks indicating defensive operations. Traffic analysis showed normal patterns. Direction finding located transmitters in known positions. Intelligence assessments concluded no immediate offensive threat existed. 3 days later, Operation Bagration began. Over 2 million Soviet soldiers attacked from positions whose strength and composition signals intelligence had fundamentally misjudged. German intelligence discovered that much of the traffic they had monitored came from deception networks, real transmitters simulating units that had already redeployed, while actual operational forces in attack sectors had moved under strict radio silence. The technique was not isolated to Bagration. Soviet operations from 1943 to 1945 employed radio Maskirovka, combining operational silence in attack sectors with false networks elsewhere. German signals intelligence was systematically defeated by deception designed specifically around how signals analysis worked. The deception succeeded because Soviet Maskirovka doctrine understood that modern signals intelligence could be defeated not through silence alone, but by creating false signatures that appeared normal under analysis. Radio deception units maintained realistic traffic patterns in departure sectors, while operational forces in attack areas moved silently, creating conditions where German intelligence saw what Soviet deception procedures had designed them to see. That was Soviet radio Maskirovka. The systematic use of false networks and operational silence defeated signals intelligence through deception, not through evasion alone.